In October of 2023, Governor Katie Hobbs canceled the Saudi Alfalfa farm's leases, and every news outlet ran the same headline: Arizona kicked them out. Here is what nobody printed: Fondomonte never left. It kept pumping in the Ranagras Plain, where one well has dropped more than 240 feet since the 1980s, and the ground itself has sunk more than 40 centimeters in the last 15 years. Basin, Arizona, population roughly 1,100, is watching its wells go dry, and every gallon of it is legal. The Ranagras Plain groundwater basin covers 912 square miles of La Paz and Yuma counties, about 100 miles west of Phoenix. It has no river, it has no lake. Every drop of water used by every farm, every business, and every home inside it comes out of the ground. Nature puts about 4,500 acre-feet back into that ground every year. Roughly 42,000 acre-feet come out. That is 9 times more water leaving than arriving, every year, for years. An acre-foot is about 325,000 gallons, so the basin loses roughly 12 billion gallons a year that it never gets back. Fondomonte, Arizona is the biggest single water user in it. And here is the detail that tells the real story. Fondomonte does not pay for that water, not 1 cent. It pays rent on the land. The water underneath the land was, until this year, free, unmeasured, and unlimited, and there was no law in the state of Arizona that said otherwise. Vicksburg, Arizona, March 6, 2014. Almarai, the biggest dairy company in Saudi Arabia, buys 9,834 acres of desert farmland through a company it fully owns called Fondomonte Arizona LLC. The price is $47.5 million. The deal breaks down into 3,604 acres of land. The company owns outright 3,080 acres of state farm lease and 3,150 acres of state grazing lease. Of that total, 4,430 acres are already being watered on the day the papers are signed. Almarai tells the Saudi Stock Exchange exactly why it is buying: to improve and secure its supply of the highest quality alfalfa hay from outside the kingdom. Outside the kingdom. That phrase is the whole story, and it is sitting right there in a public filing. Less than 2 years later, Almarai announces a second deal: $31.8 million for 1,790 acres near Blythe, California, in the Palo Verde Valley, which takes its water straight from the Colorado River, the same river that supplies Phoenix, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas. And Fondomonte is not alone out here. Aldara ACX Global, owned out of Abu Dhabi, grows feed crops on 6 farms across Arizona and California, and is one of the biggest hay exporters in North America. Foreign companies and people hold roughly 3% of American farmland, according to the United States Department of Agriculture. Almost none of that is dry, water-starved desert. This corner of it is. Alfalfa does not stop growing in winter. It drinks all year. In a desert with enough water and enough sun, you can cut it again and again through the growing year, which makes desert alfalfa some of the most productive and most water-hungry farmland on Earth. Saudi Arabia knows this better than anyone, because Saudi Arabia already did it to itself. Natalie Koch, professor of geography at Syracuse University, has laid out the math plainly. Drill deep enough, she says, and in Arizona, you can pump as much as you want. Her explanation for why the Saudis chose La Paz County is that they are, in her words, not being charged for water they extract, because there's no measuring of it. No measuring of it. Remember that. Fondomonte also leases land about 20 miles away, in a place called Butler Valley. Butler Valley matters more than its size suggests. Under the Arizona Groundwater Management Act of 1980, it is one of 5 basins in the state where groundwater is allowed to be moved and sold to other parts of Arizona. Phoenix has looked at that water. So has everyone else. In November of 2016, the State Land Department tells Fondomonte in writing that it has broken the terms of its Butler Valley leases. The violations are small and boring: missing backup walls around fuel tanks and diesel exhaust fluid storage. The company is given the chance to fix it. It does not fix it. The problem sits there, uncorrected, for almost 7 years. Meanwhile, the pumping speeds up. Federal data gathered by the United States Geological Survey shows that farm pumping in the Ranagras Plain Basin averages roughly 40,000 acre-feet per year from 2016 onward. Water levels in the basin had already been falling since the 1940s. The rate of that fall is now getting faster. In April of 2023, CBS News gets copies of the state land leases. The reporting shows Fondomonte holding rights to more than 6,000 acres of state-owned land and the groundwater beneath it. Some of that land is rented for $25 an acre. Capital Media Services put the figure at $21.60 per acre, against a statewide average of less than $28 per acre for state farmland. The money from that land trust is set aside by law for public use. The biggest share goes to Arizona's public schools. Holly Irwin, La Paz County Supervisor for District 3, had been raising this for 8 years by then. A Republican in a rural county, writing letters, asking for a water study, getting nothing. She has said on the record that having our water being mined without monitoring to grow hay and shipped overseas is unacceptable. Nobody listened. Not for 8 years. Then, in August of 2023, inspectors walk the Butler Valley property. The 2016 violation is still there, untouched, 7 years, unfixed. On October 2nd, 2023, Governor Katie Hobbs ends one of Fondomonte's 4 Butler Valley leases, a 640-acre parcel, over that unfixed violation. She also tells the company that the state will not renew the other 3, covering 2,880 acres, when they run out in February of 2024. The headlines write themselves. Arizona cancels Saudi water leases. Arizona takes back its groundwater. The story runs on CBS, Fortune, the Associated Press, and every local station in the state. On February 15, 2024, the State Land Department confirms Fondomonte is no longer watering anything in Butler Valley. And that is where almost every news cycle stopped. Almost nobody covered this next part. Butler Valley was never the main operation. It was about 3,500 acres of farmed ground. The 9,834 acres in Vicksburg, the ones Almarai bought outright in 2014, the ones in the Ranagras Plain, were never part of the cancellation. They could not be. Fondomonte owns 3,604 of those acres flat out. And the state leases, covering the rest of it, roughly 3,088 acres of farmland and 3,163 acres of grazing land, do not run out until 2031. The State Land Department collects about $83,000 a year on them. $83,000 for thousands of acres and for the unmeasured right to pump an aquifer that refills 9 times slower than it drains. If you are wondering how that is legal, so is everyone else in La Paz County. Now pull back from the surface and look at what is actually underneath. The Ranagras Plain is a filled basin, which is a geologist's way of saying it is a deep bowl in the bedrock packed with sand, gravel, and clay that wash down off the mountains over millions of years. At its deepest point, that fill goes down more than 3,200 feet. Water sits in the spaces between the grains. In the spring of 1988, a survey of wells across the basin found water sitting anywhere from 28 feet below the surface to 455 feet below the surface, depending on where you stood. Today, one tracking well in the basin has dropped more than 240 feet from where it was in the 1980s. And this part cannot be undone. Sand and gravel are stiff, take the water out and the grains still hold each other up. Clay is not. Clay layers in an aquifer act like a stack of soaked sponges under the weight of everything above them. Pull the water out from between the sponges and the weight presses them flat. Put water back in and they do not spring open again. They are simply thinner now, forever. That is what land sinking is. It is not the ground drying out. It is the ground being crushed from above because nothing is holding it up from below. More than 40 centimeters of that has been measured in the Ranagras Plain in the last 15 years. 16 inches of Arizona gone straight down. Ben Bryce, special advisor to the director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources, put it flatly at a public hearing. We are seeing severe groundwater overdraft, and every inch of sinking permanently destroys storage. Even if it rained for 100 years, that space between the grains is not coming back. The aquifer is not being emptied, it is being wrecked. So how much water is actually left down there? Arizona cannot agree on the answer, and that fight is not just talk. For decades, the Department of Water Resources reported the water in storage as the total amount available down to a depth of 1,200 feet. Representative Gail Griffin has claimed that the department under the current administration started reporting storage only down to the average well depth instead, which in the Ranagras Plain is 35 feet. Griffin's office has argued that even the top 35 feet of the basin holds at least 62 years of supply at the current rate of decline, and that lawmakers cannot write laws without the full number. Governor Hobbs vetoed the bill that would have forced it. The basin's deepest fill goes down 3,200 feet. The published figure covers 35 of them. Nobody has put a checked number on what is left. The data does not say. What the data does say, without any doubt at all, is the direction it is moving. If you are finding this useful, subscribe. We cover water systems, aquifers, and infrastructure failure every week with the full picture you need to actually follow what is going on. By the fall of 2025, the state finally moved on the basin itself. On October 15, 2025, the Arizona Department of Water Resources held an informal meeting in Brenda. Ryan Mitchell, the department's chief hydrologist, told the room that Ranagras Plain sits alongside the Gila Bend and Wilcox basins as one of the three most stressed aquifers in Arizona. On November 5, 2025, the department stopped all new watering in the basin and froze the acreage baseline. On December 18, 2025, it held the formal hearing required by law. More than 400 comments came in, spoken and written. The overwhelming majority asked the state to step in. Denise Beasley, a resident of Baus, described the situation in a way that stays with you. It's just the wild west of water. On January 9, 2026, Tom Bushatsky, director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources, issued his findings. Decision and order naming the Ranagras Plain Groundwater Basin an active management area, the 8th in state history. In announcing it, Bushatsky said, "The future of residents and businesses there depends on protecting the finite groundwater resources in the Ranagras Plain Basin." Now read what that decision actually does, because it does not do what the headline suggests. An active management area does not shut a farm down. It does not order anyone to pump less. What it does is block new watered acres beyond what was already watered within 5 years of the November 5th baseline. Make owners of big wells put in measuring devices and report their use, and tell the department to sit down with local water users and eventually write a management goal and plan. Wells pumping under 35 gallons per minute are left out entirely. And the block on new watering carries a written exception for anyone who has already sunk serious money into bringing land into production. Lawyers for the Attorney General's office argued in court that the department has no real way to force Fondomonte to use less water. It can watch. It can hold the usage at current levels. Current levels are 42,000 acre-feet a year out, against 4,500 in. The Ranagras Plain now has rules. It is not yet saved, and the management plan that would actually cut anything is years from being written. So here is what 45 years of no rules actually cost, in order. First, the wells. Residents across Baus, Brenda, Hope, Vicksburg, and Vicksburg Junction have spent years telling the state their home wells were failing. Dig the well deeper or lose the water, and deepening a well is a bill the household pays alone. A big farm well reaching hundreds of feet down does not have that problem, because it was built not to. Second, the ground. More than 40 centimeters of sinking in 15 years, and the storage space of the aquifer permanently cut down. The Attorney General's office has stated in a court filing that if this is left alone, the aquifer's water storage capacity will be damaged beyond repair. Third, the schools. Arizona State Trust land is not ordinary public land. Money from it goes by law to public beneficiaries, and the biggest one is public education. Land leased at $21.60 an acre with free water attached is a handout. Holly Irwin said as much when the Butler Valley leases fell. She wondered aloud whether anyone will ever know how much the state lost. Fourth, the corridor. The Central Arizona Project Aqueduct, the canal that carries Colorado River water across the state to Phoenix and Tucson, runs straight through the Ranagras Plain Basin. Sinking ground and earth cracks are exactly the kind of movement that damages long, stiff, water-carrying infrastructure. Whether the aqueduct is currently at risk from Ranagras sinking, the published record does not say. Nobody has answered that question in public. Fifth, the pattern. Ranagras Plain is one basin. Arizona has rural groundwater basins all across the state where, as of today, there is still no limit on how much water a well is allowed to take out of the ground. That is exactly what Ranagras Plain was on January 8th. The Groundwater Management Act of 1980 was, at the time, the toughest water law in the American West. It created active management areas for Phoenix, Tucson, and a handful of other urban areas. It made rules for the places where the people were. It left the places where the water was almost entirely alone, on the thinking that nobody was out there to use it. For 34 years, that thinking held. Then a dairy company from a country that had already drained its own aquifers read the law, found the gap, and bought the land inside it. Now, the strangest part of this entire story is that it has already happened once, and Saudi Arabia is the country it happened to. Starting around 1980, the Saudi government decided to grow its own wheat in the desert. It paid farmers roughly 3 times the world market price. It covered the cost of the fuel, the fertilizer, the loans, and the drilling. Farmers punched wells into ancient aquifers, water that fell as rain during the last ice age and has not been refilled since. It worked. Wheat output went from close to nothing before 1980 to about 4 million tons by 1992. By the early 1990s, Saudi Arabia was the 6th largest wheat exporter on the planet, a desert kingdom, feeding Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, and the former Soviet Union. Water pumping peaked around 30 billion cubic meters a year in 1994. Roughly 90% of it came from aquifers that will never refill. Then the math arrived. In 2008, the government ordered that wheat growing be cut by 12.5% a year and stopped entirely by 2016. The 2014 harvest was the last homegrown crop the state bought. And when farmers answered by switching to alfalfa, which gives about half as much crop per drop of water as wheat does, the government moved against that too. By 2018, the kingdom had locked in a ban on growing alfalfa and other green feed on Saudi soil. Now line up the dates. Almarai bought the Vicksburg fields in March of 2014. The Saudi ban on growing alfalfa at home was locked in during 2018. The company locked up the water in La Paz County 4 years before the kingdom shut the door at home. It did not run from a ban. It saw one coming. In December of 2024, Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays sued Fondomonte, Arizona, under the state's public nuisance law, Arizona Revised Statutes Section 1329-17. The complaint claims that the company's pumping since 2014 has dried up nearby wells, ruined water quality, and driven the sinking ground. Mays, who grew up in rural Arizona, has said she does not believe the state's groundwater should be sucked out from under the people of La Paz County. Fondomonte denies the claims. Its general manager, David Kelly, has described the company's Butler Valley site as one of the most efficient and highly productive farms in the Southwest, run with what he called best-in-class irrigation technology. In March of 2026, the company asked Maricopa County Superior Court Judge Scott Minder to pause the lawsuit entirely, arguing that the new active management area makes the case unnecessary. On May 12, 2026, Minder refused. He ruled that a full pause was wrong because the state is asking for relief, including a cleanup fund that the Department of Water Resources has no power to grant. The two sides were ordered to file a joint schedule by June 15th. And underneath all of it sits a single technical word that decides everything: grandfathering. When a new active management area is declared, existing users are handed grandfathered rights to keep pumping at roughly the amounts they always have. Fondomonte plans to apply. But the state has argued in writing that grandfathered rights go only to those who were legally using groundwater at the time the area was named. If a court finds that Fondomonte's pumping was a public nuisance, then it may not have been legal, and it may not qualify. So the entire future of that aquifer now rests on whether a judge decides that pumping something nobody ever made illegal was, all along, illegal. Which sentence is the real one? Did Arizona cancel the leases, or did it cancel 4 of them and quietly renew the rest until 2031? How many gallons did Fondomonte pump out of the Ranagras Plain last year? Nobody in the state of Arizona can tell you, because until January 9th of this year, nobody was required to measure it. If the sinking cannot be reversed, what exactly is a management plan managing? And who signed a lease in 2014 handing a foreign company an unmeasured aquifer for $21.60 an acre? Many of the officials who signed those leases are no longer in office. Outside Vicksburg, the sprinklers are still turning. Dozens of wells reach down into the dark under 3,600 acres of privately owned desert, into water that fell as rain longer ago than anyone can really count, and lift it into the Arizona sun. The alfalfa comes up green, the trucks come, the hay crosses an ocean, and every gallon of it is still legal.